A very warm welcome to TTK Life Strategies. My name is John, and today I'm really excited to be chatting to my guest, Brad Webster. Brad is quite a well-known figure in South Africa, and particularly in the greater Johannesburg area in the field of addiction recovery. And for more than a decade, he's been involved in various aspects of the addiction recovery field, including support, treatment, as well as training of addiction counselors, which I'm sure he will tell us a bit more during the course of the conversation. And currently he is the director of his own outpatient counseling service. So Brad, thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for being willing to share your story of experience, strength and hope with us. So without any further ado, tell us your story.
Great. Thanks very much, John. And I really appreciate what you're doing here, making these videos freely available to the public. Obviously, it brings a lot of awareness around addiction and recovery. So thank you for having me on this platform today. And I've been looking forward to this. So let me tell you my story. So I've told my story a number of times, and every time I land up telling my story, there's different dynamics that play out. So I suppose there's a lot of aspects to my story. I can try pinpoint it back to where did I become an addict? Where did addiction really start becoming very relevant in my life, where it got problematic and it was out of control and I started harming people. I can't really pinpoint to a specific day, because I'm of the opinion my addiction really started before I picked up any substances. And my story, represents particular themes in terms of not really feeling that I'm fitting in. There was always an aspect of I feel indifferent to my peers. My upbringing is one of I never came from a family that drank or used drugs. I came from a very, how can I say, like a well-to-do Christian family upbringing. We were heavily involved in a church, and I think my indifference started then, because I would go to Sunday school, I would go to church, and then I would have friends at school, and I would play club soccer, and my friends were different. So I started figuring out that I needed to be a different person between the two sets of friends. And that, I think, gave me a reoccurring theme in my life where, if you look at low self-esteem, or if you look at, being very critical on myself, I created this version of myself that felt I always needed to fit in. And as I got older and progressed through primary school, I was plagued by a belief system at home and conflicted by what I felt I wanted to be like around my friends. So, I came from a very good upbringing, don't get me wrong. It's just this conflict developed, and I started then becoming somebody I put myself under a lot of pressure. To fit in here, I need to be this way. To fit in there, I need to be that way. So in primary school was when I really used my first drug, and it was alcohol. And at the time, I didn't realize I was using a drug. I didn't choose to see it that way. There was a lot of talk, with my peers, that let's plan to drink, and we can bunk a day, and we did. And that whole planning of that little dynamic in that little meeting also became a reoccurring theme throughout my addiction process. I had to hide, I had to manipulate, I had to lie. That Jekyll and Hyde process became very relevant in my life. And I never forget the first day I drank my first beer. It was 1995, and the guys that we were drinking with were older, and we had these beers called Lion Lager, and they were long toms. And the way I had to drink the beer was, they take the cap off, they shake it, and then you drink it. And I got drunk very quickly, and that was my first taste of alcohol. And I do recall feeling very different. I felt very confident, and I felt at ease. I liked how I felt. And after my second beer, though, it was a very completely, how can I say, different reaction, because after that I was incredibly drunk. And I then passed out in the sun, and I vomited, and I was like, I'm never doing this again. And I then got very fearful that I had to go home. So I needed to make sure that the smell of alcohol was off my breath, and that my story was together, and that there was no suspicion from my parents or family members whatsoever. And we pulled the day off quite successfully. So if I could pinpoint back to then, I think the take on having to hide and be different and not being caught is something that developed and I grew over the course of time. And when I got into high school, I smoked a lot of weed. I enjoyed sport. I played soccer. I played at school level and at club level. And I really had all these aspirations on where I wanted to go with my sporting career. So I wasn't very academic at school. I did what was just required to get through. And this was also another theme. Do just enough to just be okay. And in my later years in high school, I then started, taking, party drugs, as they were called back then. And even then, it was still, I feel, on a more controlled level. I could decide this weekend I'm going to do it and then not do it for a couple of weeks. And I didn't really foresee it as a problem because the people that I chose to be with, that's what we did, and that's what we were comfortable doing. So left high school, and I'm giving you like a fast-forwarded version here of my story. So after high school, I started using drugs that I said I'd never use. I started using cocaine, and it wasn't very long after using cocaine. I think it was about 6 months of using, I landed up in treatment for the first time. Because when I started using cocaine, I started isolating myself a lot more. So I found out where to get it from, where to buy it, because a friend always used to get it for me. Eventually, I went straight to the dealer, and that whole process started unfolding in my life. So now I'm acquiring more time to spend utilizing or getting the drugs. The logistics were major, getting cocaine in this part of town, and I would use it as often as I could. And eventually it got to the point where I started realizing, hold on, like, what's going on here? I've got this need to use, I don't have the means. So then I started giving my phone away. I was like, you can actually do that. And I would give my phone away, or any items of value. I started stealing money, and that whole process of I need to hide and protect this even more, caged me in to protect that side of me that no one could find out about. And let alone, as I would, come to know later on, the cycle of addiction had already started, and it was escalating from that point onwards, or even from primary school. Like from drinking up until where I was after school, the escalation process was there. And eventually any substance that I touched, the loss of control and consequences were almost immediate. So I remember the first time I went into treatment, it was a shock. I mean, my family didn't know what to do. Oh my word, my son's an addict. This is the worst thing that can happen to us. But they were supportive. And when I went into treatment, another reoccurring theme that happened for me every time I went into treatment, when I came out, I never really conceded to the fact that I needed to completely change. Drugs were always going to be there. Alcohol was always going to be available. I needed to make the change. And I didn't really understand what that change was meant to be about, because rehab was going to cure me, right? And that's the whole understanding that my family also had. I mean, they never really got given good education on what addiction is and what recovery should look like. And I came out of rehab, and I was introduced to a 12-step fellowship, and I was told, go to meetings, get a sponsor. And I never really did that. I'd go to meetings to meet up with the guys that I was in treatment with, and then we would give each other drugs, and never really take anything seriously. And I thought, I'm in control. I've been to rehab. It's never going to get back to where it was. And I relapsed. First time out of treatment, I drank alcohol, because to me, as long as I wasn't using the harder substances, alcohol seemed like a good idea, because I could still be connected to my social groups, and I didn't have to be this weirdo that had to stay away from everybody. And obviously the drugs that I was using before, when you consume alcohol, you crave those drugs very quickly. And I couldn't hold out long. And I remember coming out of treatment, and a week after that, it was my 21st birthday. I mean, the pressure was really on, eh? And I drank. It was the first time I drank myself into a blackout, and I was a nightmare when I got home because I wanted to go out, and my family were just trying to stop me from going out. And I had a very lame attempt of trying to take my own life. I was trying to slit my wrists, but I was so drunk I couldn't really see what I was doing. And the next morning I woke up and there were just these small blotches of blood on my bed. And that day was my 21st, and my family were getting together. And being at my 21st that day, I could really then feel what I was doing to my family. And that whole idea and that denial of control, and this time is different, constantly plagued me because I never really wanted to change, actually. And I landed up in treatment a second time about a year after that, and again came out of treatment, never really applied myself in treatment. I was full of promises, full of apologies when my family members came to visit me. And when they would come visit me, I'd say, please make sure you bring me good coffee, please make sure you bring me 2 boxes of cigarettes. And my behavior never really changed. So I came out of treatment the second time, relapsed that day, and that relapse, I realized, was my using was getting harder. I was hitting rock bottoms, a series of rock bottoms, a lot quicker. And a month after that, I landed up in another facility. And the reason why I landed up in this facility is because when I came out of treatment and I used, I had a very good job. And the pressure of using and trying to manage my consequences caught up with me very quickly. So the second time I went in wasn't really to change. I felt like I had to run away from my problems. And when I got into treatment, it was great. I felt, okay, cool, like people at work are going to take care of my work. And when I get out, things are just going to go back to normal. But when I went back, everything was there waiting for me. I still had to pick up the pieces, and that pressure for me was just too much. I just didn't want to face it. And I didn't want to be in a position to be exposed that I wasn't capable of doing the work. So what was the best default for me? Use, numb these feelings. You feel like you're in control when you're using. And I was living with a family member at the time, and very quickly he saw, Brad, you got to go. I can't have you here, because you're causing turmoil in my life. I don't know what you're getting up to. And that wasn't an option for me anymore. And I moved back with my parents. And, as much as they loved me, I think they loved me too much, to the point where boundaries was very foreign to them, because to them, boundaries was being mean or being nasty or putting me in harm's way. And I would ride that wave, because I knew how far I could push them. And eventually I came back and I stayed with them. And I landed up in treatment the third time. And the third time I was in treatment there, I went to a 12-step facility, and I was there for 4 months. And this was the first time I actually really started understanding what recovery was about and what addiction was about. Because one of the first groups I sat in, they kept on saying, you've got a Brad problem, or, the drugs are the solution. And I was like, that's crazy. I can't look at it that way. Obviously, the drugs are the problem. But as I progressed through treatment, I started realizing that I was changing as an individual. And things started making sense to me. And for the first time in my life, I felt safe with an idea of what recovery should look like. And when I left that process, I was feeling good. To be very honest with you, I was on top of the world. And when I came back into the real world, it was like, okay, I've got to do meetings, I've got to get a sponsor, and this is how I need to carry on. And I wasn't employed, and I got very bored, entertained old ideas. And before I knew it, I didn't hesitate in picking up. This relapse, though, didn't last as long, because my consequences got to the point where, my family removed me from the house. As a decision, it was very hard for them. I wasn't allowed to stay here anymore. I was stealing. I was a nightmare. And again, the progression of my addiction, every time I got clean and relapsed, it would just escalate so much quicker than it did before. And I remember one day thinking to myself, you know, I started using drugs that I said I would never use. And especially in high school, I remember saying I'll never use that drug. And I would always compare my using to other people. And I'd be like, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. I'm not as bad as that person. And if I ever had to get there, then I might consider, you know, stopping and changing. And I remember the one day I actually had that realization that I had become that person my younger self had said I would never become. And I thought I was in control of that process. I became that person. And my addiction, and there were people around me who their addiction was worse than mine. And I mean, that's just how it goes. Some people are worse off than others. But at the end of the day, the main lesson that I had to learn was my addiction was bad enough for me. And with it being bad enough for me, it was bad enough for my family. It was bad enough for anybody or for people that I worked for my friends. And that's all that mattered. And I knew if I had carried on, I probably would have gotten to the point where I'd land up in jail or I would die, because that's my experience with some of my friends in addiction. So I got to the point for the first time where I realized, okay, something needs to change here. I'm scared of change because I don't know what a life without drugs is going to bring. Because if I stay here, it's a comfort zone, and I'm plagued by this idea that I'm always in control and I won't let it get that bad again. And I was broken, I was beaten, I was alone. And that pain, I believe, was my final rock bottom. Earlier, I was talking about what got me into addiction, and I mentioned I don't think it was the substances. Before I started using, there were elements to my life that kind of made me feel indifferent, and I felt that I always needed to feel better than I was. And in the end, it was that emotional pull of something needs to change here. And I knew, there was a lot of pain that I had caused in my family's life. I was stealing money. I couldn't be trusted. Nobody really wanted me around. And I wasn't in denial over that stuff. I wasn't in denial over the problem. I was in denial over the solution. So that's why the fear came in, looking forward, thinking, where am I going to go with this? What's going to change? And that little critic inside, again, was very loud. Brad, you've never finished anything in your life. You're probably going to mess it up. This is going to be your life for the rest of your life. And I had to take a risk, and I asked for help through that process. And luckily at the time, I had a sponsor who hadn't given up on me. And he said, Brad, if you want me to sponsor you, you're going to need to make a decision here. Because if this happens again, I'm sorry, I'm pulling out of your life. And I'm the only one in your life that's really kind of rooting for you. And that scared me. For the first time, I was scared that somebody was going to walk out on me. And I got into a halfway house that I shouldn't have gotten into. There's a treatment facility in Boksburg, and the director knew me quite well, and I could never get into the halfway house because I didn't come straight out of treatment to go into their facility, and I wasn't 30 days clean, and there was always just something that stopped me from being able to go into that facility. But eventually it got to the point where I think I realized I'm done. I'm done. I really want to do this now. And by the grace of a higher power, a gentleman that was working at the facility phoned me, and he said, Brad, there's a space available. We've kicked someone out. We've kicked someone out of the halfway house, and there's a space. Please come see us this afternoon. And I was like, wow. And she said, Brad, in the interview, you pay me 1,000 Rand a month, which you can afford. I was earning about 5,000 Rand at the time, which she said to me at the time, it's a lot of money for an addict to be earning. And I was thinking, what? Like, really? 5 grand? And she said, you pay me 1,000 Rand a month, you do your own groceries, you do your own washing. And she said, Mr. Webster, if you break one rule, you're gone. And I know you've got nowhere to go. And for the first time, I was up for it. I said, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to disappoint you. And after I finished that year, the growth that I had gone through as a human being, respecting myself, forming a relationship with myself. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Really starting to do well at my job. People were starting to respect me. I was starting to respect other people. I was becoming selfless. And I started realizing how my change impacted the people around me. My family were more accepting of me. Through my process of recovery, they started understanding what addiction and recovery was about. And when I finished, I never forget the day I walked out of that halfway house and I locked the gate and I turned around and I looked and I thought, you know what? I've actually accomplished something that I can be proud of. And that set the tone for the rest of my recovery. And as I continued, in my recovery, somebody that I knew in recovery approached me and said, I'm opening a rehabilitation center. Do you want to get involved? And I also believe that this work or this line of work or this field found me, because I always wanted to help others. And in that 12-step facility I was talking about earlier, I do remember sitting there thinking, I want to do this. These guys that are running the facility, they've got something that I want. And that's very appealing to me, and they're very compassionate and empathetic about the recovery approach. And I want to have that opportunity to build people up. And my journey eventually paid off. It got there, and I was offered this position, and I left a good paying job. It had all the perks, and that didn't matter to me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And I got involved in that facility, and that first facility paved the way for the rest of my career. And I also very quickly realized that because I'm in recovery, it doesn't necessarily make me a great counselor. It's part of my experience, which can be valuable in the space, but I needed to learn what it was to be professional. And I went on training courses, and my very first training course, I went to a very well-known, well-established treatment facility in Johannesburg. We're running an addiction counseling course, and I just loved it. I loved the way the facilitators were conveying the training, and I started applying it to my job. And I've just always chosen to grow in this field because it's my professionalism and my education combined with my personal experience that I think, or I believe, makes me an effective counselor. So getting into this process of becoming an addiction professional, thinking back to where I was, feeling indifferent, feeling that I'm not fitting in, has brought me to where I am today. And I still sometimes have those feelings, but I've got very good people in my life that can correct that way of thinking. And a big part of what I do today is the resilience factor, the ability to bounce back. And with resilience comes self-awareness. What are my goals? What are my needs? What are my values? And problem-solving skills. Today, I can actually remove emotion from a situation and think, how do I build on this? And how do I come back from a very difficult situation? And then obviously practicing acceptance. Not everything's going to go my way. Recovery doesn't make me perfect. I still need to act upon a way of living. And I still have my issues today. But if I look at my life today, I've got two amazing kids. I'm married today. My wife and I own a house. And these little miracles pop up in our lives on a daily basis. And I look back and I think, this was a fantasy for me once upon a time. This life was a fantasy. And I've achieved so much in my recovery. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I'm a huge football supporter, and I've had the privilege of going overseas and watching football. I've traveled the country, and I've really seen another side of life that recovery has given me as a gift. And when I sit with clients today, seeing them realize the gift within themselves, that's when I know this is the joy that I get out of what I'm doing. So addiction plays a big role of where I am today. It started me off to get with what I'm doing today. And I think, John, that's like the best summarized version I can give you of my story from where I was, what it was like and where I am now. And it's still a continuing process. It's still a journey that carries on for me today.
Awesome. You made reference to higher power, and There's a lot of research that has been done both in the fields of addiction recovery and mental health recovery that seems to indicate that some idea of spirituality plays a very important part in recovery as such. Do you agree with that? What has been your experience with regards to spirituality in recovery?
Absolutely. I think the spiritual experience that a person has to go through on the journey of recovery is, I think if I bring it back to my experience, I got to the point where I realized that I need to have some type of guidance outside of myself that wasn't destructive, like the drugs and the alcohol and the other behaviors. And I got introduced to, throughout my life growing up, I was brought up in a very Christian orientated family. So praying and the word God wasn't strange. So I detached myself from that for a big period of my addiction. Coming into recovery, I could just feel there was an emptiness in me, and I didn't really know what it was. And I was told to start praying again to whatever it is that I pray to. It doesn't have to be anything religious. I need to just believe that there's a power greater than me, whether it's a fellowship of people, whether it's believing in the universe, or whether it's believing in the fact that what I'm praying for is going to materialize in my life. And I've had a lot of good mentors in my life. And one particular mentor said to me, "How if you had to define a higher power, or if you could be sitting next to your higher power, how would you want that power to treat you?" And I started then saying, well, with respect, honesty, trust, loving, caring. And it was then put to me, well, if you can incorporate that into your life, that would be spiritual growth for you. And that would then be living on your higher power's terms, or understanding what a higher power is to you. So I then adopted that straight away because I loved that concept. And to me, practicing principles or values is a power greater than me, because it helps me become a person that people can respect, and I can then become a person that can add value. So I definitely do believe in the power of prayer and meditation. I mean, I sit some mornings and I'll play a meditation and I just drift and I think of my day ahead, and I think of gratitude, that there's definitely been an element in my life other than the human factor that has played a role in my recovery in helping me stay on this path and feel like I am connected to something.
Awesome, very interesting perspective. Tell us a little bit about what you do, your training of counselors, as well as your outpatient counseling program.
Cool. So I work for AXA, which is Addiction Certifications of South Africa, or Addiction Counseling Certifications of South Africa. And we run a number of courses to equip people who are coming into the field of addiction with the necessary skills that they need to understand as a professional to apply in the field. So things like ethics, counseling techniques, understanding what addiction is about, because these are fundamentals that I believe counselors need to be exposed to ultimately help their clients and add value and bring a skill set. So I do that, and I'm also a certified alcohol drug counselor. I'm certified internationally. And that was a whole process on its own, the amount of work and hours that needed to go into that. So I'm very proud of that certification. And locally, I am registered with BAPSA, which is the Board of Addiction Professionals South Africa. And my outpatient program is centered around, what I've mentioned throughout my story, helping people discover the resiliency in themselves, cognitive behavioral therapy, helping people adjust to the real world coming out of treatment, or people that can't go into treatment. I run programs where, I meet them weekly. We go through worksheets, we go through workshops. I incorporate family counseling and education into this process because it's so important. The family form that other piece of that missing piece of the puzzle, because where there's a strong family support unit, understanding addiction and recovery often that just marries those two entities for recovery to be successful. And that's what I do at the moment in terms of counseling. I also do interventions. I go intervene where family needs assistance, and I'll do an intervention and help people get into treatment. Drug awareness talks at corporate companies, at schools. So very much still maintaining the message of addiction and recovery, but specializing in my outpatient approach in terms of what I do with my clients. Yeah.
So if people want to get a hold of you or contact you, how do they go about that?
So very easy. I am on social media. I have got a Facebook page. My Facebook page is my name, Brad Webster, or my personal Facebook is Brad Webster. It's linked to my my work Facebook page, where they can find me at Addiction Counseling Services, and that's also linked to my Instagram page, which they can find. If they search for me, they will find Addiction Counseling Services as well. You can get a hold of me on my cell phone number, which is also on my website and on my Facebook page. So my social media platform will definitely be able to put a person into contact with me.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad, for your time and for being so brutally honest and sharing your story. And just an observation from my side, your passion is so infectious, and you can just sense what you're talking about is very, very real. So I wish you much success forward in both your recovery and your professional journey, and may you continue to touch many people's lives. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Great. Thanks very much, John. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.